My name is Elowen Marsh Reddick, and at 33, I watched my mother set my grandmother's Thanksgiving plate on top of the washing machine. Not on the dining table, not even on a folding tray near the door. On the washing machine, beside a box of dryer sheets and a plastic basket full of clean white towels. The turkey was resting under foil in the dining room. The candles were lit. 14 relatives sat under the warm gold chandelier, passing cranberry sauce and pretending they could not hear the laundry room light buzzing over an 82-year-old woman with swollen hands and a paper napkin folded carefully on her lap. My grandmother, Odelia Wren Reddick, sat there with her cane leaning against the dryer and an old brass key hanging from a faded blue ribbon around her neck, eating like a guest who had accidentally come through the wrong door. And when I stood up for her, my father opened the mudroom door to a freezing Vermont night and told both of us to leave before we embarrassed the family anymore. 8 weeks later, a lawyer placed that same old brass key in the center of a long walnut conference table and told my father the house he loved showing off had never truly belonged to him. Not the house, not the land under it, not the event hall with his name on the sign, not even the polished life he had spent 30 years pretending was his. But I did not know any of that on Thanksgiving night. I only knew my grandmother was shivering in a thin sweater, my mother was smiling like cruelty was good manners, and the people who shared our last name were suddenly very interested in their wine glasses. Welcome back to Slow Revenge Stories, where quiet people remember more than they say, and the truth has a way of coming back with paperwork. If you believe dignity matters even when no one is watching, and if stories about family betrayal, hidden strength, and calm justice stay with you, then stay with me tonight. Drop a comment, subscribe, and let me tell you how one old key changed everything my family thought they owned. Before the laundry room, before the lawyer, before my father learned what kind of ground he had been standing on, I worked nights at the Alder House Inn in Briar Glen, Vermont. It was one of those old brick inns with green shutters, uneven floors, and fireplaces that looked better in photos than they worked in real life. I was the night manager, which meant I handled late check-ins, broken heaters, guest complaints, missing towels, small emergencies, and the quiet hours when snow tapped the windows like someone asking to be let in. It was not glamorous work, but it was honest. I liked honest. Honest was clean, even when it was hard. My family did not understand that. My father, Branton Reddick, owned Reddick Hall Events, the biggest wedding and banquet venue in Briar Glen. At least that was how he said it. He wore dark coats and polished shoes and had a way of shaking hands like he was already standing one step above you. My mother, Maricel, ran the social side of the business. She could make a charity luncheon look like a royal visit and a family dinner feel like a performance review. My younger brother, Corwin, floated somewhere between the family payroll and whatever business idea he was pretending to build that month. They all saw my job at the inn as temporary, even after 9 years. To them, anything I built outside their control was just a phase I had not grown out of yet. My grandmother lived behind my parents' big white house in a guest cottage that used to be for visiting cousins before it became, in my mother's words, a more practical arrangement. Odelia had arthritis in both knees and hands that curled a little more each winter. She moved slowly, but she noticed everything. That was the thing about her. She did not speak much, but she saw the missing chair, the fake smile, the quick glance between people who thought old women stopped understanding rooms after a certain age. Her hair was silver and always pinned badly because she refused to care how perfect people wanted her to look. Her dresses were plain. Her shoes were old. Around her neck, always, hung that brass key on the faded blue ribbon. It was dark at the edges from years of being held in her palm. I visited her every Sunday morning after my night shift. I would bring warm bread from the inn kitchen, sometimes soup, sometimes leftover biscuits if the breakfast cook made too many. She would sit by the cottage window with her maple spoon in her tea, even though nobody uses a spoon that small for tea unless it means something to them. The spoon had been carved by my grandfather, Eamon, who died when I was 12. It was smooth from use, pale brown, and shaped a little unevenly, like love made by hand. She kept it wrapped in a cloth when she was not using it. The key she kept against her chest. "What does it open?" I asked her once, years before everything happened. She smiled without looking at me. "Something that waited longer than it should have." I thought she meant an old trunk, maybe a cabinet, maybe just memory. Old people are allowed to make poetry out of objects. I let it be. My parents talked about Odelia like a problem that had been solved badly. My mother would say things like, "Your grandmother has everything she needs," while standing in a kitchen where the heat worked better than in the cottage. My father called her stubborn when she asked for repairs and confused when she remembered promises. Corwin barely visited her unless there was an audience. At church events, my mother would touch Odelia's shoulder and call her our sweet old lady. At home, she would ask if the cottage smelled like medicine again. I hated that phrase more than I knew how to explain. Smelled like medicine, as if age itself was rude for entering the room. The Thanksgiving invitation came 3 days before the holiday, which was late for my mother, and therefore not an invitation at all. It was a command with timing. She called while I was restocking the front desk snack basket at the inn. I remember holding a bag of peppermint candies in one hand while she spoke in that bright voice she used when she had already decided what everyone would do. "Dinner at 6, she said. "Please be on time, Elowen. Your father wants this year to feel smooth." Smooth. That was one of her favorite words. It meant nobody honest was allowed to speak. "I'll bring Grandma over from the cottage," I said. There was a pause, a small one, but I had grown up inside my mother's pauses, and I knew when one had teeth. "Well," she said, "your grandmother gets tired around people." "She gets lonely around people who ignore her," I said. My mother breathed through her nose. "Don't start. I only mean she might be more comfortable eating earlier. In the cottage, or somewhere quiet. Your father has several clients stopping by before dessert, and we need the house to look a certain way." There it was, a certain way, not kind, not whole, just presentable. "She's coming to the table," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "Elowen, must you always turn everything into a moral test?" "No," I said. "You do that, I just answer." She hung up first. My mother always liked ending calls before the other person could sound calm. Thanksgiving in Briar Glen came cold and sharp that year. Snow had fallen the night before, just enough to cover the brown grass and make every house look cleaner than it was. I picked up Odelia at 5:30. She was wearing a navy dress I had not seen before, with a small pearl button at the collar. Her hands shook while she adjusted the ribbon around her neck, making sure the brass key sat flat against her chest. "You look beautiful," I told her. "I look old," she said. "You can be both." That made her laugh, and her laugh was small but real. I helped her down the cottage steps, one slow movement at a time. From across the yard, my parents' house glowed through the windows. Warm light, big wreath, perfect porch. The kind of house people slow down to admire. The kind of house that can hide a lot if the curtains are good enough. The trouble started before we reached the dining room. My mother met us in the back hallway, not the front entry. She wore a cream sweater dress and gold earrings and carried a folded cloth napkin like she had been interrupted in a magazine photo. "Oh, Odelia," she said too loudly. "You came all the way over." All the way over. From the cottage 20 yards behind the house. My grandmother looked at her. I was invited by blood, I thought. My mother's smile tightened. Of course. The dining room was already full. Uncle Wives, cousins, Corwin's new girlfriend, a neighbor couple my father wanted to impress, and Aunt Selvine, my father's older sister, sitting near the far end with her shoulders rounded inward like she had spent her whole life apologizing without words. The table was long and polished, white candles, green napkins, tiny place cards in my mother's handwriting. I saw my name near the middle. I saw Corwin's girlfriend's name. I saw the neighbor couple. I did not see Odelia's. My grandmother saw it too. She did not ask. That hurt worse than if she had. "There must be a mistake," I said. My father looked up from pouring wine. "No mistake." The room quieted just enough to become guilty. "She needs a chair," I said. "She has trouble with long dinners," my mother said quickly. We made her a comfortable spot somewhere quieter. I turned and saw it then. The laundry room door half open, the yellow light, the plate sitting on the washing machine, turkey, mashed potatoes, a spoonful of green beans, no gravy. A glass of water beside the detergent. My grandmother's cane already leaning against the dryer because someone had planned this before we arrived. Something inside me went very still. "You put her food in the laundry room," I said. My mother lowered her voice. "Do not make a scene." My father set the wine bottle down. "Your grandmother doesn't need the noise." Odelia stood beside me, small in her navy dress, one hand gripping the cane, the brass key resting against her chest like a quiet witness. She looked at the laundry room, then at the table, then at my father. "I see," she said. That was all. 2 words, no tears, no anger, just understanding. That was when I should have known she had understood them long before I did. Corwin leaned back in his chair and gave a little laugh. "At least she's close to the towels." A few people smiled because weak people often laugh at cruelty when a stronger person gives them permission. Aunt Selvine looked down. My father did not correct him. My mother pretended she had not heard. I walked into the laundry room, picked up Odelia's plate, and carried it back to the dining table. The room watched me like I had brought in something dirty. "She's sitting here," I said. My father's eyes went cold. "Put that back." "No." The word was not loud. It did not need to be. He came around the table slowly, wiping his hands on a napkin, though they were clean. "This table is for people who still contribute." The sentence landed so hard I heard someone stop breathing. My grandmother's fingers tightened on her cane. For a moment, the whole room seemed to shrink around her. Then Odelia looked at my father with those tired gray eyes and said softly, "Funny? I remember setting it before you knew how to hold a fork." My father's face changed. Not anger first, fear. Just a flash of it, fast as a match strike. Then anger came to cover it. "You don't get to talk to me that way in my house," he said. My grandmother's mouth moved almost into a smile. "Your house." He stepped closer. "Enough." I moved between them. "She is your mother," I said. "You put her beside detergent while you pass gravy under her roof." I did not know why I said under her roof. I meant it morally, not legally. I meant she had fed him once. She had raised him once. She had made the roof of his childhood. I did not know that in another room in another city, old documents would one day make that sentence true in a way none of us were ready for. My mother hissed my name. "Elowen." But my father was already done pretending. He took Odelia's plate from my hands and set it on the sideboard so hard the fork jumped. "If she is so precious to you," he said, "take her with you." My mother's mouth opened, but she did not stop him. She adjusted quickly. She always did. She walked to the mudroom door and opened it to the cold. Not the front door. The mudroom. The door by the boots and dog towels and cleaning supplies. The door people used when they were not meant to be seen leaving. "Go on," my father said. "Both of you. And don't come back asking for help when you realize what she costs." The relatives stared at plates, candles, napkins, anything but us. Aunt Selvine pressed both hands together under the table until her knuckles went white. For half a second, I thought she might stand. She did not. That was the thing about my family. They were always almost decent, almost brave, almost sorry, and almost never mattered. I picked up Odelia's coat from the hook and put it around her shoulders. Her body felt thin under my hands. She did not shake. I did. But my voice stayed level. "She already cost me less than pretending this was family," I said. Then I took her cane in one hand, her elbow in the other, and walked her out through the mudroom door while the Thanksgiving table stayed warm behind us. The cold hit hard. Vermont cold has weight. It does not just touch your skin. It presses itself into your bones like it has paperwork proving it belongs there. The back steps were slick because my father had salted the front walk for guests and forgotten the door he used for shame. Odelia's shoe slipped on the second step. I caught her under both arms, and for one terrible second her whole body hung against me, light and frightened and proud enough to hate needing help. "I'm all right," she said. "You are not," I said. "But you're with me." Behind us, the mudroom door closed. The lock turned. I heard it. A small metal click. My grandmother heard it too. Her hand went to the brass key at her neck. She held it once, not like a nervous habit, but like an answer. We moved slowly across the snowy yard to my car. Every step took time. Her breath came in little white clouds. My hands were numb by the time I got her into the passenger seat. I wrapped my scarf over her lap and started the heater. Through the kitchen windows, I could see my family moving around the table again. Someone had already picked up the gravy boat. Life had resumed in the warm room without us. On the drive to my apartment above the inn, Odelia looked out the window and said nothing for 15 minutes. Then, just as we passed the covered bridge outside town, she spoke. "I am sorry about your dinner." I laughed once because the alternative was crying, and I have never been good at crying where anyone can hear me. "My dinner was in the wrong room," I said. That's all. She turned her head. In the dashboard light, her face looked older than it had an hour before. You always did know where to place a chair, she said. I did not understand the weight of that sentence then. I only reached over and squeezed her hand, careful of the swollen joints. My apartment was small, slanted, and too warm near the radiator, but too cold near the windows. It sat above the west wing of the inn, up a back staircase narrow enough to make furniture choices for you. Getting Odelia upstairs took 20 minutes. She apologized on every third step, until I told her I would leave her on the landing if she said sorry again. That made her smile, which helped more than it should have. I gave her my bed and took the old love seat by the window. She argued once. I ignored her. I made tea and toast because it was all I had energy for. She ate half a slice, then reached for the maple spoon she carried in her coat pocket. I watched her stir honey into the tea with it. Slow circles, the little spoon clicking softly against the mug. You brought that to Thanksgiving? I asked. I bring what belongs to me, she said. The brass key lay against her nightgown now, catching the bedside lamp. I almost asked again what had opened, but her eyes were tired, and the night had already taken enough from her, so I let the question stay where it was. That first night, I did not sleep. I lay curled on the love seat with a blanket over my coat and stared at the ceiling while the radiator hissed and the inn settled below us. Around 2 a.m, I heard Odelia coughing. I sat up. She waved me off before I even crossed the room. Old pipes make noise, she said. You are not a pipe. No, she said. I am harder to replace. It was such a strange little joke that I laughed quietly in the dark. She smiled, closed her eyes, and slept. I stayed awake, doing math, rent, groceries, medicine, heat. I had some savings, not much. My job covered me fine when I was one person who could eat cereal for dinner and call it budgeting. It did not cover an elderly woman with arthritis, prescriptions, special shoes, doctor visits, and pride. Pride is expensive when you love someone. You are always buying the thing that lets them not ask. The next morning, my phone looked like a broken window. Messages everywhere. My mother first. You embarrassed us in front of guests. Then, your father is very upset. Then, this is not how adults behave. Corwin sent a photo of the dining table after dessert. The caption read, Hope your little rescue mission was worth it. Then another, Enjoy your antique. My father left one voicemail. I listened to it while Odelia was washing her face in the bathroom. You made your choice, he said. His voice was flat, businesslike. Do not expect this family to fund your fantasy. Your grandmother has always known how to make people feel sorry for her. You'll learn. I saved the voicemail. I do not know why. Maybe some part of me already knew evidence matters more than memory when cruel people start rewriting things. For 3 days, I answered nothing. I worked nights, came upstairs, helped Odelia dress, made soup, slept in pieces, and learned the new shape of my life. My manager at the inn, B. Callow, noticed before I told her. B was 60, divorced twice, and kind, in a way that did not ask permission. She saw Odelia sitting in the small lobby by the fireplace on the second afternoon and simply brought her a mug of cider. Family visiting? B asked me later. Something like that. B looked at me for a long second. Keep your receipts, she said. That was all. I loved her for it. Some people know how to help without making you explain the wound. A week after Thanksgiving, my mother called from a number I had not blocked yet. I answered because Hope is stupid and stubborn. Elowen, she said softly. Too softly. This has gone far enough. Your father and I talked. That sounds painful. She ignored that. You can come home, just you. We'll let things settle. You can use the guest room until you get your head clear. And Grandma? Silence. I looked across the apartment. Odelia was asleep in my bed, with the blanket tucked under her chin, one hand resting near the key at her throat. My mother sighed. Your grandmother has options. She has me. She is not your responsibility. No, I said. She became mine when you put her in the laundry room. My mother's voice sharpened. You have no idea what you are talking about. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. I had no idea. Not yet. Maybe, I said. But I know what I saw. My mother lowered her voice. You think goodness pays bills? You think loyalty keeps a roof over your head? I looked at the cracked plaster above my tiny kitchen, at the thrift store table, at the old kettle steaming on the stove. No, I said, but neither does shame once you stop accepting it. I hung up. I blocked the number, then I blocked Corwin, then my father. One by one, the apartment got quieter with each block, as if someone was closing windows in a storm. Odelia had been awake. I knew because she said, "You do not have to lose them for me." I sat on the edge of the bed. I'm not losing them. I'm finally seeing where they were standing. She looked at me for a long time. Then she reached for my hand and turned it palm up, tracing one crooked finger across the lines there. "You have your grandfather's hands," she said. "I thought I had yours." "You have both," she said. "That may save you." The first clue came at the courthouse, though I did not know to call it a clue yet. Odelia needed a replacement copy of an old identification document because one of her prescriptions had gotten tangled in insurance nonsense. I took her to the Briar Glen Records office on my day off. The building smelled like dust, wet wool, and paper that had been waiting for somebody to remember it. Odelia moved slowly through the hallway, the brass key swinging against her sweater. At the counter sat an older man with a white beard and a canvas vest. His name tag said Harlan Pike. He was supposed to be retired, according to the woman at the next desk, but he still came in 2 days a week because he did not trust anyone under 50 with land records. He glanced at Odelia's form, then at her face, then at the key, and he stopped breathing for a second. I saw it. So did Odelia. "Well?" he said quietly. "Blue ribbon." Odelia's hand closed around the key. Harlan Pike stood a little straighter. "I haven't seen that mark in 20 years. "What mark?" I asked. He looked from me to Odelia, then back again. His expression changed into something careful. "Your grandmother used to scare men in suits without raising her voice," he said. Odelia gave him a look so sharp it could have cut thread. "Harlan," he pressed his lips together. "Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, not Odelia, not Mrs. Reddick. Ma'am, respect, old and automatic." On the way back to the car, I asked, "What was that?" "Old land talk," she said. "What does blue ribbon mean?" "Something people should have left alone." "That is not an answer." "No," she said, pausing beside the car while snow dusted her shoulders. "It is a door, and not every door needs opening before supper." It was such an Odelia thing to say that I almost let it go. Almost. That night, after she fell asleep, I searched Blue Ribbon Briar Glen Land Trust on my phone. Nothing useful came up. A few dead business listings, an old Maple Festival article, a scanned town notice from the 1990s that would not load properly. I searched her name. Odelia Wren Reddick. Mostly nothing. Church mentions. Obituary for my grandfather Eamon, a property tax note from years ago that disappeared behind a county login. Nothing, but not nothing. The internet had a way of showing the outline of a thing without giving you the thing itself. I felt the shape of a question starting to form. The second clue arrived by certified mail in early December, in a thick blue-gray envelope with a return address printed in dark ink. Vale, Penrose, and Quillen Trust Council, Burlington, Vermont. I signed for it at the in-front desk because the mail carrier knew me and Odelia was upstairs resting. I almost said it with her pharmacy papers. Then I saw the words under her name: Annual Ground Lease Certification, Blue Ribbon Trust. My hands went cold. I carried the envelope upstairs and waited until she woke. She was sitting against the pillows, the maple spoon in one hand, a cup of broth in the other. I held up the envelope. "This came for you." She looked at it for a long moment. Her face did not change, but her hand tightened around the spoon. "Set it on the dresser," she said. I did not. I sat in the chair beside the bed and opened it because she did not tell me not to, and because by then I had earned at least one honest answer. Inside was one page, dense and formal. Most of it meant nothing to me, but some phrases stood out like lit matches. Parcel 9A, Briar Glen Residential Lot. Reddick Primary Residence Ground Lease Review. Maple Ridge Commercial Lease. Reddick Hall Events Use Agreement. I read the words again. Reddick Primary Residence. Reddick Hall Events. My parents' house. My father's business. "What is this?" I asked. Odelia set her broth down very carefully. "Paper," she said. "Grandma, Important paper. That is worse. She looked toward the window. Snow was falling again, soft and steady. Put it somewhere safe. Does Dad know about this? Her mouth moved, not quite a smile. Your father knows many things badly. What does that mean? It means knowledge without character turns into theft if nobody stops it. I stared at her. She closed her eyes as if the conversation had tired her more than the stares ever could. Please, she said, not tonight. There are moments when pushing is not courage. It is just taking from someone who has already had too much taken. So I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and slid it into the inside pocket of my winter coat. I told myself I was respecting her. I told myself there would be time. That is the lie people tell themselves right before time becomes the one thing they cannot get back. December became a life of small systems. I learned which pharmacy had the cheapest refill. I learned which soup she would eat when her hands hurt. I learned to warm her socks on the radiator before helping her dress. I learned that pride sounds like, I can do it, even when the person saying it has been trying to button the same sweater for 6 minutes. I learned that love, real love, is often boring to watch. It is pills sorted into plastic boxes. It is wiping counters. It is pretending the couch is comfortable. It is saying, take your time, when time is the thing making you late. Odelia improved for a while. Not fully, but enough to sit downstairs by the inn fireplace in the afternoons. Guests loved her because she had the gift of making silence feel like company. A man from Ohio asked once if the brass key was antique. Odelia said, no, just patient. He laughed because he thought she was joking. I did not. A few days before Christmas, Bea found me in the linen closet crying into a stack of towels. I hated that. I hated being caught soft. She stepped in, closed the door behind her, and leaned against the shelves. Money? She asked. I wiped my face. Everything. She nodded. That's usually where money hides. I laughed, then cried harder, which was rude of my body. Bea gave me an advance without calling it one. She added some of Odelia's meals to the in-kitchen count and told me no one would notice. She moved my shifts around so I could take Odelia to appointments. She never called herself kind. She just kept doing kind things. That is how you know it is real. On Christmas Eve, Odelia and I ate canned tomato soup and grilled cheese at my small table. Snow pressed against the windows. Downstairs, guests laughed near the fireplace. I gave her a soft green shawl I found at a second-hand shop. She gave me the maple spoon. I tried to refuse it. No, she said. A gift is not a negotiation. This was Grandpa's. Yes. You use it every day. Yes. Then why give it to me? She placed it across my palm. It was lighter than I expected, warm from her hand. Because you fed me when you thought I had nothing to feed you back with. My throat closed. She looked at the spoon, then at the key around her neck. That is the only kind of person who should ever be trusted with enough. Enough what? I asked. She smiled, tired and sad. Enough to be dangerous if they were cruel. The radiator hissed. Someone downstairs dropped a log into the fireplace. I held the spoon and felt, for the first time, that my grandmother was standing somewhere I could not see, holding a door half open with her body. Later that night, after she went to bed, I took the blue-gray envelope from my coat and read it again. Parcel 9, A, Reddick, Primary Residence, Reddick Hall Events, Blue Ribbon Trust, Merritt Vale, Senior Council. There was a phone number at the bottom. I saved the number into my phone. I did not call. I wish I had. I also understand why I did not. She had asked me to wait without saying the word, and I had spent my whole life watching people take things from her while calling it practical. I would not take her secret, just because I was curious. The new year came with a hard cold that made the inn pipes complain and the sidewalks shine with ice. Odelia's cough started on a Tuesday. Small, dry, easy to lie about. By Friday, it had settled lower. By Sunday, she was sleeping more than she was awake. I brought her tea, broth, toast, soup. She waved most of it away. Her hands shook when she held the mug. Her skin had that thin gray tone winter gives to people who are already tired. I'm calling the doctor, I said. I have outlived worse weather. You are not weatherproof. She smiled faintly. Neither is your father, though he believes otherwise. That was the most she had said all morning. I took her to urgent care. They said bronchitis, maybe early pneumonia, watch her closely. Bring her back if breathing worsened. I watched her closely. I watched the rise of her chest. I watched the way she paused before standing. I watched the way she touched the key more often, thumb rubbing the old brass until it caught light. That evening, she asked me to bring her coat. Not because she was cold, because the blue-gray envelope was in the inside pocket. I handed it to her. She held it against her lap. When the time comes, she said, you call Merritt Vale. The name moved through the room like another person entering it. What time? I asked. The time when doors start opening. I sat beside her bed. Grandma, please, tell me what this is. She looked at me, and for once the strength in her face scared me more than the weakness in her body. Your father spent his life mistaking possession for ownership, she said. Those are not the same thing. I did not speak. She took the brass key from around her neck. The ribbon left a faint line on her skin. She placed the key in my palm, then closed my fingers around it. It was heavier than it looked. A locked door only scares people who forgot they still have a key, she said. You've said that before. I meant it before. What does it open? Her eyes moved toward the window. Snow slid down the glass in silent streaks. The truth, she said. Eventually. That night her fever rose. Not high enough at first to panic, then high enough that panic stopped being a choice and became an instruction. Her breathing changed around midnight, a shallow, pulling sound. I called an ambulance while she argued from the bed that I was being dramatic. Her voice was too weak to make the lie convincing. While we waited, I packed a bag. Her medicine, a sweater, her documents, the blue-gray envelope, the maple spoon, because I could not explain why leaving it felt wrong, and the brass key, now wrapped in a handkerchief and tucked into the side pocket. The paramedics came up the narrow stairs with practiced kindness. Odelia apologized for the trouble. One of them, a young woman with tired eyes, said, Ma'am, trouble is our job. I liked her for that. As they carried my grandmother down, Odelia reached for me. I leaned close. Not your father, she whispered. I know. Not your mother. I know. Merritt. I know. Her hand found mine. For 1 second, her grip was firm. Then they moved her through the door, down the stairs, and into the cold blue flash of the ambulance lights. I locked my apartment with shaking hands. The inn stood behind me, warm and full of strangers sleeping peacefully under old quilts. My car windshield was covered in frost. The ambulance pulled away, red lights scattering across the snow. I followed it through the empty streets of Briar Glen with the brass key in my coat pocket and the blue-gray envelope on the passenger seat. I thought I was taking my grandmother to the hospital with a blanket and a medicine bag. I did not know I was carrying the key to every lie my family had built their life on. The ambulance lights made the snow look red and blue all the way to Briar Glen Memorial, and I followed close enough to see the back doors every time we passed under a street lamp. I had driven those roads my whole life. I knew the turn by the covered bridge, the long flat stretch past the closed maple stand, the hill where people always slowed too late when ice came early. But that night, every road felt unfamiliar, like the town had been rearranged while I was upstairs packing my grandmother's medicine bag. The blue-gray envelope lay on my passenger seat. The brass key was in my coat pocket, wrapped in a handkerchief. The maple spoon was tucked beside it because leaving it behind had felt almost like leaving a person. I kept one hand on the wheel and one eye on the ambulance, and I said the same 4 words under my breath at every red light. Not yet. Please, not yet. By the time they got Odelia into a room, her breathing had become work. Pneumonia, the doctor said, and then heart strain, and then frailty, and then a careful pause where honest people put the truth when they do not want to break it over your head all at once. I had heard enough soft hospital language in my life to understand what was standing behind it. She was 82, thin as winter light, and the cold had found the weak place in her body. They gave her oxygen. They started antibiotics. They asked about medical decisions, emergency contacts, existing paperwork. I gave them what I had. I did not give them the blue-gray envelope. I did not give them the key. Some part of me had started listening to her before I understood why. My parents arrived at the hospital the next afternoon. That surprised me for half a second, and grief is cruel because it will let you hope even when you know better. My mother came first through the ICU waiting area in a camel coat and low heels, her hair smooth, her face arranged into something that could pass for concern from a distance. My father came behind her with his phone in his hand, already looking annoyed by the lighting, the chairs, the smell of hand sanitizer, the whole inconvenience of a sick old woman refusing to disappear cleanly. Corwin came last, wearing a quilted jacket that probably cost more than 2 months of Odelia's medicine, and he looked around like someone had invited him to the wrong kind of restaurant. My mother saw a nurse watching and changed her voice before she reached me. "Oh, Elowen," she said, putting both hands on my shoulders. "We came as soon as we heard." She made it sound like a race, like love had called her, and she had answered barefoot through snow. I looked at her hands on my coat and remembered those same hands opening the mudroom door. She asked the nurse how Odelia was doing in the voice people use when they want strangers to admire their pain. She said, "We have been caring for her for years." And my father looked out the window while she said it. Corwin checked his messages. Nobody asked if Odelia was scared. Nobody asked what she had eaten. Nobody asked whether she had been asking for anyone. They asked if she was lucid. They asked if she had signed anything. They asked carefully, too carefully, whether she had brought any papers with her when she left their house. That was the moment the room changed for me. Until then, the envelope had been a mystery. The key had been a symbol. But my mother's question turned both of them into something else. Hunger has a sound if you know how to hear it. Sometimes it sounds like concern. Sometimes it sounds like the word paperwork spoken beside a hospital bed. "What papers?" I asked. My father finally looked at me. "Don't play games." "I'm not." My mother's hand dropped from my shoulder now that the nurse had moved away. "Elowen, this is not the time for your little performance. Your grandmother may have old documents, confusing documents, things she may not have understood. Your father needs to review them before anyone outside the family gets involved." "Outside the family," I said. Her mouth tightened. "You know what I mean." I did know. She meant lawyers. She meant people who wrote things down. She meant anyone who would not look away because Branton Reddick expected them to. I thought of Odelia whispering, "Not your father, not your mother, Merritt." I thought of the brass key in my pocket, heavier than it should have been. Then I looked at my mother and said the cleanest sentence I had. "If Grandma wants you to have something, she'll say so." My father stepped closer. "She is my mother. She was your mother on Thanksgiving, too." The words landed. Corwin looked up from his phone. My mother turned pale with anger, not shame. My father's jaw moved once. For a second, I thought he might raise his hand. The waiting room had too many witnesses for that, so he only leaned in close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath. "You have no idea what you're standing in the middle of," he said. I looked back at him. "I'm starting to." They stayed for 43 minutes. My mother went into Odelia's room for 7 of them, cried just enough to make her eyes shine, and came out saying Odelia was too tired for visitors. My father did not go in until I told him the nurse had asked if immediate family wanted time with her. He stood by the foot of the bed, with his hands in his coat pockets, and said, "Mom," like the word tasted unfamiliar. Odelia's eyes opened once. She saw him. She did not smile. She looked past him toward me, and her hand moved on the blanket like she was searching for the key that was no longer around her neck. I stepped forward and took her hand. My father saw it. That was all the conversation they had. That night, after they left, Odelia came back to herself in the small hours. The hospital had gone quiet, in the way hospitals never fully do. Machines hummed, shoes whispered in the hall. Somewhere down the corridor, a man coughed and a woman answered him softly. I was half asleep in the chair, still wearing my coat, when her fingers moved against mine. I sat up so fast the chair squeaked. "Elowen," she said. "I'm here." "Water." I held the straw to her lips. She took 2 small sips and closed her eyes. For a minute I thought that was all. Then she said, "The key." I reached into my coat pocket and took it out, still wrapped in the handkerchief. Her eyes followed it. I placed it in her palm, but her fingers were too weak to close around it, so I held it there for her. "The spoon, too," she whispered. I took the maple spoon from the bag and laid it beside the key. Her face softened when she saw it, and suddenly she did not look like a woman dying in a hospital bed. She looked like a young wife standing in a kitchen with a man who carved small things badly and loved her well. That is what grief does. It lets a whole life cross a face in 1 second and then takes it back before you can ask to see more. Listen to me, she said. I'm listening. You do not fight them at the funeral. My throat closed. Grandma, no, listen. You do not argue over flowers. You do not correct stories. You do not chase them around the room with the truth. Let them polish their shoes. Let them tell people I was simple. Let them have the noise. I shook my head because I could not make myself say yes. You call Merritt Vale after the burial, she said. Not before, after. Bring the key, bring the spoon, bring the envelope. Please tell me now. She looked at me for a long moment. There was pity in her face, and love, and something like apology. Some truths are wasted on a sickbed, she said. They need a table. I started crying then silently, the way I do when my body loses patience with my pride. She lifted one finger against my hand. You fed me when you thought I had nothing to feed you back with, she said. That is why you can be trusted with enough. Enough what? I asked again, like I had on Christmas Eve, because maybe dying people answer repeated questions differently. She almost smiled. Enough to open doors without becoming the kind of person who locks others out. Then she said the line one last time, slower than before, each word carried across pain like a candle across a dark room. A locked door only scares people who forgot they still have a key. I bent over her hand and held it against my forehead. She asked me not to be afraid of what came next. I told her I was not afraid, which was a lie, but a loving one. She knew. Odelia always knew. She closed her eyes before dawn, and her breathing thinned until the space between one breath and the next became too wide for the world to cross. She died at 5:18 in the morning, with the brass key under my hand and the maple spoon on the blanket beside her. And when the nurse came in and turned off the machines, the room did not become silent. It became honest. I did not fall apart in the hospital. Some people break loudly. I become useful. I signed forms. I thanked the nurse. I called B from the parking lot, and she said nothing for a while, then said, "Come home when you can." Home. Not the house where I was raised. Not the cottage behind it. The inn. The small apartment with bad heat and one old love seat and a bed that still held the shape of my grandmother's last weeks. I sat in my car until the windshield fogged and held the brass key against my chest, pressing it so hard the teeth left marks in my palm. Then I wiped my face, put the key back in my pocket, and called the funeral home Odelia had once mentioned in passing. Love, for some of us, is logistics after the world ends. My family took over the funeral by noon. I do not know who called them. Maybe the hospital. Maybe grief travels faster when there is something to manage. My mother arrived with a folder and a voice full of instructions. My father spoke to the funeral director like he was negotiating a business rental. Corwin asked whether there would be food after, because people would expect something. They chose a short service on a weekday morning at a chapel outside town, the kind with beige carpet and silk flowers that had been fading since 1998. My mother said Odelia would have wanted something simple. My father said no need for excess. This from people who had once spent $6,000 on lighting for a charity gala. I remembered what Odelia had told me. Let them have the noise. So I did. I did not fight about the casket. I did not fight about the flowers. I did not fight when my father wrote the obituary and called her a quiet woman devoted to family. Devoted to family. I read those words on the funeral home website and laughed once into my sleeve, because if I had opened my mouth, something worse would have come out. I did not correct anyone when my mother told guests that Odelia had become difficult near the end. I did not correct Corwin when he said Grandma had always preferred small rooms. I sat in the back row with the brass key in my coat pocket and the maple spoon in my bag, and I said goodbye to her in a language nobody around me had earned the right to hear. My father gave the only family speech. He stood at the front in a dark suit and said, "My mother was a simple woman. She never cared much for material things." Aunt Selvine made a sound then, not a sob exactly, more like a breath that had tripped over something sharp. I looked at her. She was staring down at her hands. Her face had gone gray. For the first time in my life, I wondered what my aunt knew and what silence had cost her. My father continued talking about sacrifice and family duty and how hard it had been to care for an aging parent. He did not mention the laundry room. He did not mention the mudroom door. He did not mention the cottage with the weak heater or the prescriptions my grandmother had been rationing before I moved her out. He stood beside her casket and made himself the generous son in a story where the only person who could correct him was gone. After the burial, snow began to fall. Thin flakes, slow and light, the kind that look gentle until enough of them gather. People went to their cars. My mother touched my arm in front of a cousin and said, "We should talk soon." Her voice had warmth for the witness. Her fingers had warning for me. "We will," I said. She looked surprised, maybe because I had not sounded afraid. I waited until I was back in my car. Then I took out the blue-gray envelope, found the number at the bottom, and called Merritt Vale. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Reddick," he said, as if he had known the call would come at that exact minute. I did not ask how he knew it was me. "My grandmother is buried." "I'm sorry," he said, and there was real sorrow in it. Not performance, not polish. Real sorrow, worn smooth by years of knowing this day would arrive. "She told me to call you after." "Yes," he said. She was very clear. "What is this about?" There was a pause, not like my mother's pauses. This one had care in it. "It is about what your grandmother owned," he said, "and what your father believed he could take because she allowed him to believe it." My hand tightened on the phone. "Do not sign anything," he continued. "Do not give anyone the key. Do not discuss Blue Ribbon Trust with your family. There will be a formal reading in Burlington in 6 days. Your presence is required. Bring the key, the maple spoon, and the original envelope." "Why the spoon?" I asked. His voice softened. "Because your grandmother wanted the room to understand the difference between what has value and what has a price." I sat there in the cemetery parking lot with snow melting on my windshield and my grandmother's fresh grave behind me, and I felt something inside me shift, not heal, not yet, but turn toward a sound in the distance, a door being unlocked. The meeting took place in Burlington in an old brick building near the lake. Not a glass tower, not the kind of office designed to make people feel small. Vale, Penrose, and Quillen had worn wooden floors, brass lamps, and walls covered in framed maps of Vermont counties, land maps, survey lines, old deeds enlarged behind glass. I arrived 15 minutes early because fear makes me punctual. Merritt Vale met me in the lobby himself. He was tall and narrow, with silver hair, a navy suit, and eyes that looked tired in the way honest lawyers probably get tired after watching lies live too long. "Miss Reddick," he said, taking my hand in both of his. "Your grandmother spoke of you often." That almost broke me more than the funeral had. He led me down a hallway to a conference room with a long walnut table. At one end of the room stood a blue cabinet, old and heavy, with a brass lock darkened by age. At the head of the table sat an empty chair. Beside it, leaning carefully against the wall, was Odelia's cane. I stopped walking when I saw it. Merritt noticed but did not rush me. Good men understand that some objects are not objects right away. My family arrived together at 10 sharp, dressed like they were attending a business closing. My father wore his courtroom face, though we were not in court. My mother wore pearls and grief lightly, like a scarf she could remove when it got warm. Corwin looked bored until he saw the cabinet, then curious until he saw me, then irritated that I existed in the same room as whatever he had come to collect. Aunt Selvine came alone. She sat near the far end, hands folded, eyes fixed on Odelia's cane. My father did not say hello. He looked at Merritt and said, "Let's keep this efficient." Merritt placed a thick folder on the table. "Efficiency was one of your mother's gifts, Mr. Reddick. We will honor it by being precise." My father's mouth tightened. Merritt began with formalities. Full name, dates, confirmation of death, estate documents. Then he turned to me. "Miss Reddick, do you have the key?" Every eye went to me. I reached into my coat pocket and took out the brass key on the faded blue ribbon. It looked small in my hand, too small for the silence it created. My father laughed once. "That old thing?" Merritt looked at him. "Not old, Mr. Reddick. Original." He took the key from me with both hands as if accepting something sacred, walked to the blue cabinet and slid it into the lock. The sound it made when it turned was quiet. Still, it seemed to fill the whole room. Inside the cabinet were files, ledgers, rolled maps, sealed envelopes, and a small wooden box. Merritt removed the first folder and placed it on the table. The estate of Odelia Wren Reddick, he said, consists primarily of her controlling interest in Blue Ribbon Land Trust, together with related limited liability companies, lease rights, debt instruments, and real property holdings in Vermont, New Hampshire, and northern New York. Corwin sat up. My mother blinked. My father said, "What?" Merritt turned a page. As of the most recent independent valuation, the combined estate is worth approximately $184 million. Nobody moved, not even my father. For a few seconds, the room held the kind of silence that comes when every lie inside it realizes it has been seen. My mother's hand went to her pearls. Corwin's mouth opened slightly. Aunt Selvine closed her eyes. My father stared at Merritt like the number had been spoken in a language he refused to learn. 184 million, Merritt repeated. Rounded down. My father stood halfway. That is impossible. No, Merritt said. It is inconvenient. Those are different things. He laid out the first map. Parcel 9, A. Briar, Glen, residential lot. I recognized the address before anyone said it. 14 Ash Hollow Road, my parents' house. The White House, with the wreaths, the dining room, the chandelier, the laundry room, the mudroom door. Merritt placed a finger on the boundary line. The land beneath the Reddick primary residence has been owned by Blue Ribbon Trust since its formation 23 years ago. The structure itself was subject to a long-term ground lease and later a mortgage assignment. That lease is in significant default. My mother made a small sound. My father's face went hard. That is my house, he said. Merritt looked at him over his glasses. You have possessed it for a long time. You have not owned the ground under it for 23 years. Possession. Ownership. My grandmother's voice came back to me so clearly, I almost turned toward the empty chair. Merritt continued. Maple Ridge commercial lease. Reddick Hall events use agreement. Senior debt acquisition. Property tax advances. Default notices prepared but held. He explained it plainly, patiently, layer by layer. My father's event hall, the business he had used to make himself important in Briar Glen, sat on land controlled by Blue Ribbon Trust. The loans keeping it alive had been purchased through a trust company connected to Odelia. The unpaid lease obligations had been tracked for years. Every polite extension, every delayed notice, every little mercy my father had mistaken for weakness had been a record. My grandmother had not been asleep behind the cottage window. She had been watching the numbers walk toward her. Then Merritt opened another folder. To understand why Mrs. Reddick created the trust, he said, we need to discuss the events following the death of her husband, Eamon Reddick. Aunt Selvine covered her mouth. My father said, no. It came out too fast. Merritt did not look at him. He placed copies on the table, a deed transfer, a notarized statement, a survey amendment, signatures, dates. My grandfather had died in late March. The transfers were dated 3 weeks later. Odelia's signature appeared on documents moving several parcels and commercial lease rights toward my father's control. Merritt placed a forensic report beside them. The signature was not hers, he said. The notarization was false. The survey amendment was altered after filing. Mrs. Reddick discovered the attempt within months. My father's chair scraped back. This is old nonsense, he snapped. Completely old. She was grieving. She signed things she didn't remember. People forget. Merritt finally looked directly at him. Your mother forgot many things in her later years, Mr. Reddick. She did not forget being robbed. The room went colder than the lake outside. Aunt Selvine started crying without sound. Merritt turned one page and slid it toward her. Ms. Arbor gave a private statement to Mrs. Reddick's counsel 19 years ago, he said. She confirmed that Branton Reddick pressured his mother to sign blank documents and later represented that she had agreed to transfers she had specifically refused. My father looked at his sister with a hatred so old it looked practiced. Selvine whispered, I was scared. You were greedy, he said. No, she said, lifting her head at last. I was weak. You were greedy. It was the first brave thing I had ever heard my aunt say, and the sadness of that almost outweighed the satisfaction. Merritt continued. He explained that Odelia had chosen not to spend her remaining life fighting her son publicly in court while grieving her husband. Instead, with legal help, she protected what had not been stolen challenged what could be quietly blocked, created blue ribbon trust, and over 2 decades used lease income, land rights, and careful purchases to rebuild control around the very properties my father thought he had taken. She did not live rich. She lived simply. She let people believe she had lost. But every year, quietly and legally, she pulled one more thread of the truth back into her hands. My father laughed then. It was not a normal laugh. It was the sound of a man reaching for arrogance because the floor had disappeared. "If she had all this," he said, pointing at the folders, "why did she live behind my house like some poor widow? Why did she let us pay for things? Why did she sit there and take it?" Merritt's answer was gentle, and that made it worse. Because she wanted to know what kind of children she had when they believed she had nothing left to give. My mother turned her face away. I looked down at the table. My grandmother had known. Maybe not every insult before it happened. Maybe not the laundry room. But she had known the shape of them. She had watched them treat her like a burden while they stood on land she owned, spent money protected by agreements she controlled, smiled for guests under a roof held up by her patience. And she had still hoped, maybe, that blood would remember itself without being forced. Merritt opened the wooden box next. Inside lay a small, folded cloth. He unwrapped it and revealed a second maple spoon. Older than mine, darker with age, carved by the same hand, my grandfather's. "Mrs. Reddick left instructions about this," he said. "The spoon is not financially meaningful. She was clear on that. But she asked that it be placed beside the estate documents so every person here would understand her standard for inheritance." He read from a letter then, Odelia's words. I knew because I heard her inside them. "To the child who opens the door when it is inconvenient. To the child who brings food without asking what she will receive. To the child who sees an old woman as a person and not a cost. I leave what remains of my work, my land, my claims, and my trust. Not because blood is nothing, but because blood without kindness is only biology." Merritt paused. "The sole beneficiary of the estate is Elowen Marsh Reddick. There are silences that rest. This one struck. My mother made a sound like she had been slapped by air. Corwin pushed back from the table. My father stared at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw him without his costume. Not powerful, not certain, not the man at the head of the table. Just a frightened person who had built his life out of taking and had finally reached a locked door. Then he exploded. He called it fraud. He called me manipulative. He said I had poisoned a sick woman against her family. He said Odelia was confused, unstable, bitter. He said no court would uphold it. He said he had cared for her, housed her, fed her, tolerated her, tolerated. The word came out before he could dress it better. My mother began crying then, real or close enough to pass, saying surely I would not put my own parents in the street. Surely family meant something. Surely Grandma would not have wanted this. Corwin said, "What about Reddick Hall?" Like a boy asking who had taken his toy. Aunt Selvine sat still, tears sliding down her face, and did not defend any of them. I waited. That was new for me. The old me would have argued. The old me would have tried to prove the pain was real enough to count. But sitting at that table with the brass key before me, I understood something my grandmother had tried to teach without saying directly. When the truth is documented, you do not have to scream for it to be present. When my father finally ran out of breath, I took the maple spoon from my bag and placed it on the table beside the key. "You hid her beside the washing machine," I said. My voice was quiet. Everyone heard it. "You made her eat in the laundry room because you thought she had nothing left to give you. She owned the land under your table, and still all she wanted was a chair at it." My mother whispered my name. I looked at her. "No, you don't get to make my name soft right now." Then I looked at my father. "You told me not to come back when I learned what she cost. I learned she cost me sleep, money, time, and a couch that ruined my back. You know what she gave me? The first clean love I ever had in this family." His face twisted. I touched the brass key with one finger. "A locked door only scares people who forgot they still have a key," I said. She never forgot. Nobody answered. There was nothing useful left for them to say. What happened after that was not revenge the way people imagine it. There was no shouting in the street, no dramatic scene with boxes on the lawn, no pleasure taken from panic. I had watched enough cruelty to know I did not want to become fluent in it. I told Merritt to do everything by the law, every notice proper, every deadline clean, every claim documented. The forged transfer file went to the state attorney's office. The false notarization went to the licensing board. The civil action began to clear the old title defects. The unpaid ground lease on my parents' house was called according to its terms. The debt on Reddick Hall events was enforced on schedule. My father said I was destroying him. Merritt said the documents suggested he had been doing that himself for years and had merely mistaken delay for forgiveness. I made one offer, and I made it through counsel because I had learned not to hand soft things directly to people who liked breaking them. My mother alone was offered a modest apartment in Burlington, paid for 18 months with no conditions, except that she not contact me outside legal channels. I did not offer it because she deserved it. I offered it because Odelia had given me enough, and I refused to let my first act with power be imitation. My mother rejected it through her lawyer. She called it insulting. 2 weeks later, she asked if the offer still stood. By then, it did not. That may sound cold. It was not. It was a boundary with a date on it. The legal process took months. It always does. Paperwork moves slower than grief and faster than denial, which is a strange middle speed to live inside. Reddick Hall closed in the spring after the debt was called, and no refinancing appeared. My father blamed me in every room that would still listen. Fewer rooms did as time passed and records became public. The house on Ash Hollow Road went through the proper notices, hearings, and final transfer. Nobody was thrown out at night. Nobody was sent through the mudroom door into snow. Every window was honored. Every deadline was clear. That mattered to me. Justice that becomes careless is just revenge wearing a nicer coat. Corwin left Briar Glen before summer and moved somewhere in Colorado where he sends one message every few months that starts angry and ends unfinished. My mother moved in with a cousin near Montpelier. I have not spoken to her directly. Aunt Selvine wrote me one letter. A real one, no excuses dressed up as explanations. She said she had watched my father pressure Odelia after Eamon died. She said she had stayed silent because she was afraid of being cut off, afraid of being alone, afraid of him. She said fear was not innocence. I kept the letter. I do not know yet if forgiveness lives near it. Maybe one day, maybe not. Some doors open slowly, even with the right key. As for my father, the investigation did not give him the clean punishment people want in stories. Real law is not built for neat feelings. Some things were too old to charge the way they should have been. Some records had aged into difficulty. But recent financial abuse, false statements connected to trust assets, and attempts to interfere with the state documents had teeth. The case moved forward. His name, once polished on banquet signs and charity boards, became attached to filings he could not smile his way out of. When I saw him once outside the courthouse, he looked smaller, not poor, not broken enough to make me pity him. Just smaller, the way people look when the room stops agreeing with their version of themselves. I did not move into my parents' house. People assumed I would. They assumed inheritance meant taking the biggest bedroom and proving some point by sleeping under the roof that had rejected me. I sold the structure after the land issues were cleared and kept the parcel in trust. The laundry room was empty the last time I walked through it. No plate on the washer, no detergent beside a holiday meal. Just white machines, a tile floor, and the faint smell of the lemon cleaner my mother liked. I stood there for a long time. I thought I would feel victory. I felt tired. Then I opened the back door, the mudroom door, and let cold air move through the room until it felt less like a secret. I stayed at the Alder House Inn through the summer. Bea told me rich people still need jobs if they do not want to become useless, which was her way of saying she expected me for my Tuesday shift. I kept working while Merritt taught me what Blue Ribbon Trust actually held. Land, leases, maple groves, commercial lots, a warehouse outside Plattsburgh, mineral rights nobody had touched, old debt instruments, patient investments, and records so clean they felt like my grandmother's handwriting. Odelia had not been hiding treasure like a fairy tale. She had been guarding structure, ground, terms, boundaries. She had built a life under everyone else's life and waited to see who would treat her like a human being when they thought she had no leverage at all. By fall, I had made the only decision that felt like mine and hers together. The old Reddick Hall building, after the business closed, sat empty beside the Maple Road. People expected me to sell it. Instead, I turned part of it into a warm dining room for elders, caregivers, and anyone in town who had been pushed to the corner of somebody else's table. We called it the Maple Room. Bea helped with the kitchen plans. Harlan Pike showed up with old survey maps and pretended he was only there to check measurements. Merritt donated the first set of tables, all round, because he said no one should sit at the head. Aunt Selvine sent a box of dishes with no note. I used them. The first Thanksgiving at the Maple Room, snow came early again. Of course it did. Vermont likes symmetry. I stood in the kitchen before opening, stirring a pot of chicken stew with my grandfather's maple spoon. The brass key hung framed by the entrance, not as decoration, but as a promise. Odelia's cane leaned in my office beside a photograph of her from when she was young, standing in a maple grove with one hand on her hip and the kind of smile that made me understand why men in suits had once been afraid of her. The room filled slowly. Widows, old men with careful hair, a retired teacher whose children lived 3 states away, a caregiver who cried when we told her she could sit and eat, not just serve. Nobody ate in the laundry room. Nobody was placed near the door to make the room look better. Every chair mattered because every person did. Near the end of the meal, I saw an old woman sitting alone at a center table, both hands wrapped around a mug of cider. She was wearing a faded blue scarf. For 1 second from behind, she looked enough like Odelia that my breath caught. Then she turned, and of course it was not her. Grief does that too. It borrows strangers for a second and gives your dead back just long enough to remind you they are still gone. I went to the kitchen, stood by the stove, and let myself cry where the steam could cover it. My grandmother did not leave me money first. She left me a test, though I do not think she meant it cruelly. She wanted to know who I was when there was no reward for being kind. She wanted to know if I could choose a person over a room full of approval. She wanted to know if I understood that family is not proved by who claims the table, but by who makes space when someone weaker reaches it late. The money changed my life. The key changed my understanding. But the laundry room changed my spine. That was the night I stopped begging cruel people to become decent before I acted decent myself. So that is my story. My parents kicked me and my grandmother out on Thanksgiving. They thought they were throwing away a burden. They thought the old woman with the cane, the faded ribbon, and the brass key had nothing left but medicine bottles and memory. But Odelia Wren Reddick had spent 23 years proving that quiet is not the same as powerless. She owned the ground beneath their perfect house. She held the paper under their polished business, and in the end, she left everything to the one person who opened the door when everyone else closed theirs. If this story reminds you of someone your family keeps pushing to the corner, call them. Ask if they have eaten. Ask if they are warm. Ask if they need a ride, a chair, a real place at the table. Sometimes justice begins before the lawyer, before the will, before the reveal. Sometimes it begins when one person stands up in a room full of people sitting comfortably and says, "No, she belongs here." The end. Lessons from this story. 1. Kindness is not weakness. Elowen helped her grandmother when she believed there was no money, no reward, and no hidden benefit. That made her kindness real. True character shows when nobody is promising anything back. 2. Family is proven by actions, not blood. Branton, Maricel, and Corwin shared Odelia's blood, but they treated her like a burden. Elowen gave her warmth, food, time, and dignity. That is what real family looks like. 3. Never judge someone's value by their weakness. Odelia looked poor, old, and powerless, but she was carrying truth, ownership, and strength quietly. Some people do not announce their power. They simply remember who they are. 4. Quiet justice can be stronger than loud revenge. Elowen did not scream, lie, or act cruelly. She let the documents speak. She followed the law. She allowed the truth to cost what it should have cost from the beginning. 5. Always make room for the overlooked. The person sitting alone, ignored, or treated as a burden may be carrying more pain, wisdom, and dignity than anyone realizes. Sometimes giving someone a chair is the beginning of changing everything.